Good morning, you Global Flows junkies. This is Patrick Brady, your host, and we have a great newsletter this week for you. Really good articles to talk about the global flows around the country and set up for 2024. So, there's a lot going on in the world in 2024, and we'll be tracking every week, finding new news articles, and I'll also be implementing a sprinkling of my own experience, especially with China and when I used to live there. So, global economy, there's some predictions in there. They would not seem so positive, but you never know. You never know. With developed and developing countries, they have some growth forecasts. Global protectionism. Growth slows, policies become more protectionistic. I think you'll find around the globe policies will continue to be more protectionistic. The global trade and the open border, the open import flows from the 1990s is slowly starting to contract back, and you'll find that countries are contracting their global flows of imports. There are some very interesting political movements in 2024, and there are over 40 elections, as I've mentioned before. Here are some of the countries that are having elections this year, so the globe could be completely reshaped going forward. So, of course, the United States has a big election, and we have more than likely Biden and Trump, and we have some very interesting third-party candidates that could completely disrupt the whole electoral college in 2024. So we will monitor that closely. India has a general election in mid-2024. One of the most watched elections of the year. India is the largest democracy, and it's going to choose its next government. EU Parliament elections, Taiwan elections. You'll see an article about Taiwan, and the ramifications of the winner of that election are huge, whether or not how they engage with China, how they engage in a kind of independence, what their relationship is with the United States, and how that region is developed will be super important, super interesting. We'll keep an eye on it. Mexico, there's a general election in Mexico in July. And then on top of that, in Africa, there are 18 countries having elections. Europe, over 37 countries, including France, Greece, Poland, Spain, and Turkey. And in Asia, have 12 countries: Bangladesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. We'll keep an eye on it. For global shipping, as we've reported many times, there are problems. Houston, we have a problem. The Red Sea and Suez are being invaded by the Houthis. So a lot of the trade routes are going from Suez Canal around the south of Africa on their way to Europe. So that's the Asia to Europe route. But in my business, which is, as you know, patio furniture, we haven't seen really a drastic reduction in supply, but a reduction in supply is coming, and insurance rates are much higher, and we've probably basically seen a doubling of container costs for shipping. So hopefully that trend doesn't continue, but it could. And how that is going to affect consumers is that they're going to pay more for goods again. And we should see some kind of inflationary reaction. Also, the Somalis, who, I think a minute ago there were lots of pirates overtaking cargo ships. Well, that's back. The Somalis are active again in piratism. And the Panama Canal has a low water, aka drought. And so some of the companies that are paying more to get their containers through are having priority there. So U.S. Navy is taking action against the Houthis and the Somalis and trying to reduce the disruption there. Global discontent, you'll see in Germany, many people are saying there's a recession in Germany, or possibly depression. Certainly being cut off from Russian oil and natural gas did not help that situation. So also there's an article about African nations that were French colonies and how they're pushing back. Here's some messages on China. China overtook Japan as the leading car manufacturer in the world. I remember being in China and seeing some really interesting names of car companies. One is called Geely, There's a red flag. There's a Great Wall. Cherry with only one R, the cherry, and the brilliance. When I lived in China, it was really interesting. I'd never seen a place with so many kinds of cars from all over the world. They had Peugeot, Ford, GM, Volkswagen was everywhere, and Buick was everywhere. I think Buick was super popular because back in the day when Nixon and Kissinger came over to China during ping pong diplomacy, they were riding in a Buick. And so that was kind of, even today, people remember that as like a luxury vehicle. All kinds of Korean car companies, of course, the Japanese car companies, but looks like China car companies are making a big push. And I think a lot of the sales in India and Russia and some of this type of countries really cater, Chinese manufacturers cater to those locations. Not in the US though. Chinese government is insisting that people around the world, global politicians around the world, call Tibet Xizang. There's a new Dalai Lama successor, and Beijing wants to control the narrative on nomenclature. That's really interesting. I did get a chance to go to Tibet with my sister, some friends, and it was interesting because they were building this huge rail line from Chengdu up to Lhasa. So that's, I don't know what the elevation incline is, but Lhasa is 4,500 meters high. So this train basically really had to wind through a bunch of mountains and stuff. And the laborers working on that project were mainland Chinese people, not local Tibetan people. So that was in the intent of the government to kind of infuse Han Chinese culture into the Tibetan culture. So it was a really weird dynamic, and the local Tibetan people did not love that. And so best case scenario is that the Tibetan culture can be preserved because it is interesting and completely different than the Han Chinese. Record numbers of Chinese migrants are entering the U.S. through Ecuador and Mexico. Why? It's interesting. The article goes on to say that there are kind of political motivations and some freedom motivations to do that. And there's an article about China investors. And then lastly, an interesting comment about Korea. Korea is banning the farming, slaughter, and sale of dog meat by 2027. And there's maybe a reduction of dog meat lovers in Korea. I used to live in Qingdao, and in Qingdao, that's Shandong province in Qingdao, there were a lot of dog meat restaurants. And outside these restaurants, the reason is because Chinese people generally don't eat dog, but Korean people do. So there were a lot of like Korean minorities in this little town called Liang in Qingdao. But outside these dog meat restaurants, there were cages, and you could basically choose your live dog that you wanted to eat. I think some breeds are more tasty than others. I don't know. And you can choose the dog that you want. This is very common in Chinese, restaurants. You can choose your fish, you can choose your clams. Here you can choose your dog, and live dogs in a cage. So I was teaching in Qingdao, and a friend, it was one of our colleagues, our coworkers, wanted to order a dog as something like a joke, or like, hey, this would be interesting to order a dog. And she ordered the dog head. So, okay, what does that come in? Like a soup or a stew, or, what could a dog head possibly be? Well, much to our chagrin, in walks the waitress, and she puts down the dog head onto the table, and it is a steamed dog head. Like the dog head looked like a dog head without hair, but it was steamed. We quickly lost our appetite, went home, later on went out to McDonald's and had a good meal. So, but you're going to see dog meat restaurants go away. Everyone, I had fun with this. I hope you did too. Thank you, friends, family, and supporters for Global Flows, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.